words of the immortal Dudley Moore, now is the time to say goodbye. Now is the time to yield a sigh. I won't go on. 25 years ago, I first became a trustee of this extraordinary organisation. I little thought that you would still be putting up with me all those years later. In fact, I little thought I'd still be putting up with you lot 25 years later. That I'm here at all is due to an extraordinary coincidence. I happened to pop into our local library and I got out a book by my favourite travel writer, Eric Newby. And I got about 15 pages into Newby's book, Love and War in the Apennines. And I realised that he'd been in the same prison camp as my dad. That book really helped me fill in the gaps that I'd never really understood in my father's story. Well, Newby told me to contact Keith Killby, founder of the Monte San Martino Trust. Keith listened to my story. He fixed me with one of his trademark scowls and invited me to join him at lunch the next week in the basement of an Italian restaurant in Haymarket, where I found half a dozen delightful elderly gents who'd also been in the same camp, Fontanellato, as my father. Well, Dad, like many of our fathers or grandfathers, Dad had said almost nothing about his wartime adventures. So I found this lunch with these 6 guys just completely overwhelming, and the stories they told me about the camp and what they'd done after they got out. Well, not long after that, my hard-working predecessor, Brian Lett, invited me to become a trustee, and I realised that, like many an Italian POW, there was no escape. 25 years later, being part of the trust and contributing not only to its survival, but to its flourishing growth and development has been one of the most fulfilling and pleasurable periods of my life. And of course, like any organisation, it's the people who matter. Keith himself was the most extraordinary man, a conscientious objector who nevertheless wanted to do his bit. So he thought he'd join the SAS, a nice easy little posting as a medical orderly, and learnt to parachute so that he could join them in action. He set up this extraordinary organisation aged 72, the age, as it happens, that I am now. He was just starting and did another 30 years after that of active work for the trust, which he had created, and which, incidentally, he funded constantly and extremely generously. Well then, and sadly they're no longer with us, but then were the old originals. Old soldiers like Ian English, Anthony Lang, your dad, Mick Wagner, Frank Unwin. Where's Betty? Is Betty here? Betty, dear old Frank, your dad. Michael Ross, David, your father. Maurice Goddard, Toby Graham, and so many more. Extraordinary people with just extraordinary stories to tell, which they told with such extraordinary modesty. It's been such a privilege to know people like that. My fellow trustees, many of them sons or daughters, or with other family links to the Monte San Martino story. Letitia, Christine, John, Anne, Namina, Julia, Christy, Christopher, Ian, David, to name but a very few, have been total joy to work with. And I know they will remain friends for life. Letitia, particularly, she who must be obeyed, as she is known to many. Arthur Rackham Sprite, as she is known to at least one of her numerous admirers, has been a particular chum, great counsellor, teaser, supporter and friend. Thank you, one and all. Please, a round of applause for these hard-working trustees. I've also, sadly, he's not well enough to be with us, but Antonio Milozzi, MBE, Christopher, you gave him his MBE, I think, in Monte San Martino, all those a couple of years ago. Antonio was one of Keith's earliest friends and advisors in terms of setting up the trust, and he and his family have been our advisors right from the start. We've also, Angelo, had wonderful support from the Italian embassy in London and, of course, its counterpart in Rome. I'm so sorry that Ambassador couldn't be with us, but it's just great to have you here, and I really can't thank you enough for your support and encouragement over the last few years. It's been wonderful to have you with us. And I have to thank all of you with your stories to tell, who make this a real family and a unique family history that we share and celebrate. I feel so lucky. I think we all feel so lucky to be part of this extraordinary story. Thank you for your friendship and support over the years. What memories we have to share, we who've been part of this family. I hope you'll indulge me if I just give you a few quickly of my fondest memories. And Roger, you'll remember the first one, our first Freedom Trail from Sulmona Camp in 2001, which you organised. I think you still bear the scars of that, greatly supported by our own Brian Lett. Roger is here with us today, fresh from a Defence and Security conference in Berlin, where the Escape Lines Memorial Society was presented with the prestigious European Prize for Citizenship, Security and Defence for its work, and I quote, in helping the old to remember and the young to understand. Roger, I'm so proud as a patron of Elms that the Society has been given this award, and I want to say that there is nobody who deserves it personally more than you for your work in keeping the memory of the bravery of those escape lines and all the people they saved alive all over Europe. Roger Stanton, ladies and gentlemen. So coming back to the main square in Sulmona, President Ciampi, no less, came to address us. There were hundreds of us standing in the square in the heat, all in our shorts and our boots, waiting to get going on the walk. And out comes President Ciampi from his sort of wonderful limousine to address us. And it was wonderful, the words he said, so encouraging to us and so appreciative of the fact that for once, Italian bravery was being celebrated. This was really important to the president. And I remember on that walk particularly visiting the village of Pietrosantieri, where we were greeted by a very dignified elderly lady. She was the sole survivor of a Nazi massacre that took place in that village. The villagers had been helping escapers. And one day the Germans got them all out into the square and shot them all, apart from this one woman who had managed as a little girl to hide under her mother's skirts and had lived to tell the tale and was there to welcome us as we came in on that first Freedom Trail. It was after that first walk that I first visited Corvaro. And my father sheltered in the winter of 1943, recovering from pneumonia. And I met the De Michaelis family, who sheltered him and saved his life. I cannot tell you how thrilled I am to be able to say that the grandson of the De Michaelis family, Giuseppe De Michaelis, has come all the way over from Italy today to be with us, as has the great-granddaughter of that family, Benedetta Coffini. Please, will you both stand up? Representing all the Italian helpers. They're sitting with my son Tom and my niece Katie. And one of my dearest hopes is that one day they too may come to play their part in the Monte San Martino story, because it's, yeah, why not? Why not? No pressure or anything. It's their grandfather's story, and it's all our story. And it's lovely to have you both here. Thank you so much for coming. So, moving on, I remember the 60th anniversary celebration in Fontanellato. And that was a really special anniversary because we still had half a dozen of the old originals. And they took us on an extraordinary tour of the orphanage that was the prison camp in Fontanellato. I remember we stood in one window and one of them said to me, we used to stand in this window and watch the Italian girls parading past on their evening passeggiata. And if we ever wolf whistled out of that window, the Italian guards would shoot at us. So we had to learn to duck pretty quickly. They took us to the bathroom in the basement where they used to brew their own hooch, their own alcohol. Not that they needed too much, because actually there was a perfectly good functioning bar in this orphanage as well. They each got a bit of an allowance of beer and wine and a martini each day. But then the most amazing moment was when one of them asked the then owner, look, could you take us up into the attic, please? And she said, oh, perché? Why you want to go in the attic? And he said, oh, just something I want to check. So we trooped up into the attic, and there we were in the eaves with the roof, the roof beams all around. And in between each of the beams were piles of soil. This was the remains of one of the tunnels that was still there 60 years later. An extraordinary moment, really, as history came right up to date. At this point, I do want to repeat what Letitia has said in appreciating Mark Dingle for coming here specially all the way from the United States. His grandfather was another prisoner in Fontanellato. Who knows, Mark? He may have planted some of those piles of soil in the attic. You'd never know. Great of you to come, Mark. Thank you so much for being with us. I won't ask you to sing because I know that's your big hobby. I'm so sorry for inflicting my own singing voice on you earlier on. Other memories quickly. Well, Vanny Treves. We all loved Vanny Treves, one of our fellow trustees, and we all remember the incredible appeal that he launched. He said to me, he said, Nick, how much do you think we could raise if we have a big appeal? I said, oh, Vanny, you know, little charity, niche, nobody's really heard of us. If we got £60,000, that would be fantastic. Rubbish, he said. Well, he didn't use that word, actually, but, you know, you get my gist. Rubbish, he said, we'll raise £1 million. And he did. And he opened up, he had been a very well-known solicitor in the City of London. He opened up his address book and he just contacted all his friends and former clients. And they all coughed up, Jane. Didn't they? Absolutely amazing. And then, and this is a particularly poignant memory for me, the 75th anniversary. We were in Fontanellato again. Keith Killby, our founder, couldn't be with us. He was very, very ill and he had to stay in bed at home. So during the course of the meal that we all had together, we opened up a phone line and we all shouted our greetings to Keith and wished him get well soon. About an hour later, as we set off from where we were having dinner down to the beautiful little opera house in the middle of Fontanellato, and as I walked down to the opera house for a wonderful performance by 3 local tenors, Letitia phoned me to tell me that Keith had passed away, just a few minutes after he had heard our greetings from Fontanellato. That was a really extraordinary moment. And I talked to the local mayor, Francesco Trivoloni, one of our former students. And I said, look, Francesco, this has happened. Should we announce it now or should we wait and let everybody listen to the singing? And that's what we decided to do. So everybody listened to the singing. Beautiful. The voices of those 3 tenors echoing out. That's a tiny little opera house in the middle of a square. They opened all the windows so that everybody around could hear the opera. And then at the end, we announced Keith's death. And it seemed so fitting that a man that had given so many years of his life should have died on the 75th anniversary of the armistice. And while we were all together in Fontanellato, and Letitia, you were still there with him in London, it was an extraordinary extraordinary moment. And there have been so many more memories. I remember, Letitia, the months you and I and Christine spent clearing out Keith's flat. Now, Keith was a correspondent. He typed letters on his ancient Olivetti using sheets of carbon paper to keep a copy. He wrote to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of former prisoners. He wrote to fellow stamp collectors. He campaigned for a united Europe and had done since before the war. He campaigned for better treatment of butchers. He was a Smithfield butcher by trade. He wrote endless letters on behalf of butchers. And I particularly remember an extremely rich vein of correspondence to the local council. Mostly letters of complaint about the paving stones in Belsize Park. Dozens and dozens and dozens of them. And all that paper is now in my garage, and partly still in Letitia's garage. And Letitia, I think we have a date in a couple of weekends. I can hardly wait. I think you're getting the picture of what a very special time this has been in my life. Being able to follow in my father's footsteps in the way that I have done, thanks to the Trust and these extraordinary experiences that we've all had in it. And it's time for me to move on and to let somebody else have a go. And I'm delighted to say that Phil Cook, Professor of Italian History and Culture at Strathclyde University, has accepted that challenge. In the time that we've spent together, I've been incredibly impressed and encouraged by Phil's interest and enthusiasm for the Trust, and by the depth of his knowledge and the breadth of his academic contacts in this country and in Italy. He's going to be an absolutely fantastic chair, and so well placed to continue to develop our role as the leading experts in that period of history in Italy that is of such passionate concern to us all. He's worked with our lovely partners in Istituto Pari. He's worked with our friend Professor Robert Gordon, and he is as excited as I am by our partnership with the US National Archive and the chance to build real contacts in Italy with all our hundreds of former alumni students. I think the next few years are going to be pretty jolly exciting. And Phil, it's my very great pleasure to welcome you. So it really has been a huge privilege for me to lead this trust for a while, to play a part in its work, to enjoy the friendship and support of some truly great fellow trustees, volunteers and supporters, and to have been able to follow with a real personal prayer of thanksgiving in the footsteps of my father and get closer to him after his death in a way that I was never able to do during his lifetime. And I got closer to him and the many thousands like him who made a break for freedom from captivity in 1943 and who found kindness and friendship in a foreign land. I must, of course, always thank my darling Helly for her constant support and encouragement in this endeavour, as in many others, as she knows to her cost. And to my sons Ed and Tom, Ed couldn't be here, but Tom, and Katie, my niece, who've always taken such a great interest in their grandfather. Let me finish by proposing a toast to this wonderful organisation, to founder Keith and everyone who has played or is playing a part in keeping alive the story of prisoners of war in Italy, and the brave Italians who gave them shelter and security when they had none, food when they were starving, and friendship when they were alone. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Monte San Martino Trust and its people.
The Monte
Monte San Martino.